The sun beat down like a hammer over Bramblehorn County's auction yard, casting long shadows over the dry, cracked dirt. The crowd of ranchers sat under their wide-brimmed hats, shifting in the wooden bleachers, shirts damp with sweat and faces blank with routine. Ennis Dobson's voice, sharp and practiced, echoed through the dusty air as he called out the next horse, a worn-down chestnut quarter horse, ribs showing, eyes dull, a faded R brand pressed into his flank. Just another reject, forgotten by time. But then the auction stopped. Dead still. A girl had wandered into the arena. She couldn't have been older than 6. Barefoot, caked in dirt, wearing a sagging brown dress and boots too big for her feet. Her matted hair clung to her cheeks, streaked with tears and dust. She clutched an old piece of saddle leather to her chest like it was holy. The crowd didn't know what to do. No one moved, no one spoke. Then her voice broke the silence, small and broken, yet sharp enough to slice through every soul there. "Please don't take him. He saved me." Sheriff Cyrus Vane stepped down from the edge of the bleachers, the dust swirling at his boots. His frame was tall, weathered, a man who'd seen too much and said too little. He stopped a few feet from the girl. She didn't flinch. The chestnut horse beside her barely moved, except for the flick of an ear. His head hung low, his legs trembling under his weight. But his eyes, they watched her. "What's your name, darlin'?" Cyrus asked gently. She looked up at him, her face streaked with sun and sorrow. "Wren Odessa Fields," she whispered. "He pulled me out of the fire. At the Hillgrave Ranch. When it burned. No one came back for me." Gasps rippled through the stands. Hillgrave. That place had gone up in flames over a year ago. 2 adults dead. No mention of a child. Reverend Tilley, sitting behind the fence, clutched his Bible tighter. Dr. Winnie, Cray narrowed her eyes at the horse. She'd treated enough animals to know when one had seen too much. And up in the shaded platform, Mayor Thatch Blevins shifted in his seat, the weight of something unspoken growing heavier in his chest. This wasn't just a lost girl and a dying horse. This was the return of a secret no one was ready to face. Cyrus Vane didn't say a word at first. He just looked at the girl, really looked. Wren stood there trembling, the dusty hem of her dress fluttering in the wind, her arms still wrapped around that torn piece of saddle leather like it held her whole world. The sheriff's gaze drifted to the horse, who hadn't budged from her side. The chestnut's legs shook slightly, his eyes glassy and sun-worn, but every time Wren shifted, the horse shifted too, staying close, guarding her like an old soldier. That brand burned into his flank, the faded R, pulled at something in Cyrus's memory. Something buried. Ennis Dobson stepped forward, brushing his hand nervously down his vest. "This horse came in 2 days ago from a seizure in the west pasture," he muttered, glancing between Cyrus and the girl. "Nobody claimed him. Thought he'd be out of here before sunset." He lowered his voice. "He shouldn't still be standing, far as I'm concerned." Reverend Tilley made his way toward the rail, his white hair glowing in the afternoon light. "Did you say Hillgrave, child?" he asked gently. "The fire that took Thomas and Maggie Hillgrave, that was over a year ago. They were said to have no children." "I'm not their child," Wren replied quietly, her voice catching. "They found me. After my mama, after she passed. Miss Maggie said I could stay forever. She said I was home now." Her eyes shimmered as she looked down at the horse. "And when the fire came, they were gone, but he wasn't. He broke the gate, got me out, took me into the canyon. He never left me." The silence returned, thick, weighted, not even the wind dared stir it. Mayor Thatch Blevins stood now, pulling off his hat and stepping toward the edge of the bleachers. "We searched that ranch top to bottom. There were no signs of another soul." His voice was even, but there was doubt creeping through. "If she's telling the truth, then we failed her. All of us. Dr. Winona, Winnie. Cray crouched beside the horse, brushing her hand gently down his neck. The animal flinched but didn't pull away. She peered up at Cyrus, her voice tense. He's running on something stronger than muscle. Loyalty, maybe. Trauma, definitely. But this isn't just coincidence. That girl belongs to him. And he belongs to her. Cyrus looked down at Wren again. The dust, the fire, the loss, it was all there in her eyes. There would be paperwork, questions, rumors. But none of that mattered now. Because somehow, in the heart of that broken little girl and that dying horse, was a truth no one could deny. The tension didn't break. It settled deeper, into boots, lungs, and glances that darted between Wren and the horse like flickering candlelight. The crowd hadn't moved, but something had changed. What was supposed to be just another auction had turned into something else entirely. Cyrus Vane could feel the weight of it tightening in his chest. People didn't like uncertainty in Bramblehorn. They liked paperwork, family names, ownership. And what they saw now didn't fit into any column. Ennis Dobson cleared his throat, trying to regain control. Well, now, the bid on this animal hadn't been placed yet. As far as I know, he still needs a buyer. His words fell flat. No one raised a hand. No one wanted to touch what they didn't understand. All eyes stayed on the girl. And that terrified Cyrus more than the fire she'd walked out of. Because this town had never been kind to what it couldn't explain. From the side fence, a gruff voice cut through the silence. How do we even know she's tellin' the truth? It was Roy Breeden, one of the older ranchers, arms crossed, spitting tobacco into the dirt. Could be some runaway makin' up stories for sympathy. Or someone put her up to it. Murmurs of agreement rose around him like smoke, hesitant but present. That kind of suspicion spreads fast in a place like this. Reverend Tilley stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. The question shouldn't be whether she belongs here. The question is what kind of people we are if we send her away after what she's survived. His words held weight. Amos Tilley had buried half the town's dead and married the other half. But even he knew his voice might not be enough. Wren's lower lip trembled, but she didn't cry. She looked up at the men judging her with eyes too old for her years. You don't have to believe me, she said. But he knows. He remembers. He kept me warm in the canyon, brought me water, even when he was hurt. If I'm lying, why would he still stay by me? That question hung heavy in the hot air, unanswered. The chestnut gelding let out a long breath, then leaned closer to Wren, his body trembling but steady. Winnie Cray stood slowly from where she'd been examining his legs. He's got scarring, she said aloud. From fire. And a dislocated hip that healed wrong, likely from carrying something heavy through rough terrain. Or someone. She turned to the crowd, her voice steel. You can believe or not. But that horse lived for her. And maybe she's the reason he's still standing. Sheriff Cyrus Vane didn't sleep that night. The image of Wren Odessa Fields, standing barefoot in that arena, holding onto that half-dead horse like he was the only thing tethering her to the world, haunted every corner of his mind. By morning, he was at the courthouse, thumbing through dusty files, old fire reports, and land deeds from Hillgrave Ranch. But nothing. No mention of a child. No emergency contacts. No proof she ever existed. Mayor Thatch Blevins called an emergency meeting before noon. Around the long oak table in the town hall sat Cyrus, Reverend Tilley, Dr. Winnie Cray, and 2 members of the Child Services Board from the county. We can't just let emotion rule here, Blevins said, voice stern. She may be telling the truth, or maybe she's been coached. Without records, we've got a mystery. And Bramblehorn doesn't need more mysteries right now. Cyrus leaned forward, jaw tight. And if she's not lying? If that horse really did save her? If that girl survived a fire alone in the hills, and no one came looking, and now she's back, and all we're doing is trying to erase her again? His words landed heavy. No one met his eyes, not even Blevins. Across the table, the younger of the two child services agents, a woman named Connie Park, flipped through a thin folder. She's not in any system. No school records. No birth certificate on file here. But that doesn't mean she's a fraud, just that she's been missed. Or hidden. She closed the folder gently. We can't leave her in limbo. Back at the auction yard, the chestnut gelding lay under the shade of a tin-roofed shelter behind the stable. Winnie Cray checked his vitals again. He was fading. The trauma, the starvation, and years of neglect had taken their toll. Yet, the moment Wren entered the pen, his ears perked slightly, his head lifting. She knelt beside him, resting her head on his shoulder. I named him Harlan, she whispered, after the hill, so he'd never forget where we came from. Reverend Tilley arrived just before sundown. He stood quietly, watching the two, girl and horse, as if trying to read something written in a language only the heart understands. We may not have papers, he said finally, but what we do have is a choice. Do we listen to what's in front of our eyes, or to the fear that's been behind us too long? By the next morning, Harlan couldn't stand. His legs buckled when he tried. Winnie Cray, though tough and seasoned, fought the tremble in her voice as she checked his breathing. He's shutting down, she told Cyrus, her hands gently pressing against the horse's ribcage. The only thing keeping him going is her. And I don't know how much longer that'll be enough. Word had spread. By midday, half the town had stopped by the stable under some excuse, to check on feed, to drop off blankets, to ask vague questions about the girl. Some brought food. Others brought judgment. A few brought both. But one thing became clear. The longer Wren stayed, the more she became a mirror, and not everyone liked what they saw in her. Cyrus stood at the gate, arms crossed, watching Wren softly hum to Harlan as she dipped a rag into cool water and dabbed it along his neck. She hadn't cried again. Not once. As if every tear had already been spent in that fire. Sheriff, a voice called from behind. It was Connie Park from Child Services, holding a document. We got confirmation. A birth certificate. Amarillo General. Wren Odessa Fields. Mother, Lacey Fields. Deceased. She paused. She's real. But the relief was brief. And legally? Cyrus asked. Connie looked down. No guardian listed. Which means she's a ward of the state. We're going to have to take her to a placement facility until we sort out long-term care. The words hit harder than Cyrus expected. He glanced toward the girl, skin burned by sun, hair tangled, voice quiet but steady, and the thought of pulling her away from Harlan felt more cruel than any crime he'd chased down in his years as sheriff. He opened his mouth to speak when Wren, still kneeling, whispered something that froze him in place. He's not dying, she said, barely audible. He's waiting. Winnie turned, confused. Waiting for what, sweetheart? Wren didn't answer right away. She pressed her palm to Harlan's side and whispered, He's waiting to know if I'll be safe. If someone's going to love me, like they did. If I'm not alone anymore. And suddenly, the tired horse gave a long, low exhale. Not pain, not fear, but something closer to peace. As if he had finally heard what he needed. That afternoon, the town council gathered under the eaves of the old chapel, as the sky turned the color of bruised lavender and dust swirled low across the fields. It wasn't an official meeting, not on paper, anyway, but every chair was filled. Mayor Thatch Blevins stood at the front, his hat in his hands, his eyes heavier than they'd been in years. We've got a situation, he began. One that don't fit clean in any rulebook. And I figure before we act, we best hear the people. The people, however, were split. Some argued that Wren needed structure, a foster home, school, clean clothes, and regular meals. Others insisted she'd already survived more than most adults and had earned the right to stay, especially with Harlan hanging on by a thread. It wasn't about law anymore. It was about conscience. About whether the town could look that little girl in the eye and say they had done right by her, or turned away twice. Sheriff Cyrus Vane stepped forward. His voice was steady, but his words burned with conviction. You all know what we missed the first time. That fire at Hillgrave. We didn't ask enough questions. We didn't search far enough. We let a little girl disappear because it was easier to believe she wasn't there. Now we've got a second chance. Don't pretend it's anything else. Back at the stables, Wren didn't know about the meeting. She stayed by Harlan's side, singing an old hymn that Maggie Hillgrave used to hum in the mornings, soft and slow, barely more than a whisper. Harlan's breath came shallow, but steady. His eyes opened just enough to find hers, and she smiled faintly. I'm still here, she whispered. And I won't leave, not even if they try. Winnie Cray, standing a few feet away, swallowed the lump in her throat. She had delivered foals, stitched wounds, and put down horses that no longer had fight. But this one, this mangled, trembling soul beside the girl, was fighting for something else. He won't go until she's safe, she said quietly, almost to herself. Damn stubborn thing. As the sun began to set, casting orange light through the barn slats, footsteps approached. Cyrus stood in the doorway, hat in hand. Wren, he said softly, can you come outside a moment? There's something I need to tell you. Her fingers froze on Harlan's mane. She turned, slowly, eyes searching his for meaning, for permission. And when the horse blinked, just once, she stood. Wren followed Sheriff Cyrus Vane out of the barn, her small hands clenched at her sides. The dirt felt hotter now, the world heavier. She kept looking over her shoulder, as if afraid Harlan might vanish if she blinked. Outside, a quiet hush had fallen over the yard. Several townspeople stood in a loose circle, avoiding each other's eyes. Cyrus stopped near the council steps and knelt to face her, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. There was a vote, he said carefully. Some folks think you should go with the state, let them find you a home. Some think your home's right here. He paused. It was close, Wren. Real close. She didn't answer right away. Her face barely moved. But her fingers began to twist the edge of the saddle leather she always carried. The silence around her was a verdict in itself. Too heavy, too long, too cruel for a girl who had already lost more than most people could bear. If I go, she whispered, who's gonna tell Harlan? Mayor Thatch Blevins cleared his throat, stepping forward. His voice wasn't as strong as it had been earlier in the chapel. The vote was tied, he said. But the final say came to me. He looked at the ground. And I chose to let you stay. You have people here now, Wren. And you won't be forgotten again. The relief didn't come all at once. Wren didn't cry or smile or even move. She just stood there, processing it, her small chest rising and falling with quiet disbelief. Then her feet moved on their own, running back toward the barn, the dirt flying beneath her as the others watched in silence. Inside, Harlan hadn't moved, but when she dropped to her knees beside him, his ears twitched, and he lifted his head just slightly. I told you, she said breathlessly, pressing her face into his mane. We're safe now. Dr. Winnie Cray stepped forward from the shadows, her voice cracking. He waited, she said to no one in particular. All this time, he waited to know she wouldn't be taken again. Cyrus Vane stood quietly beside her, hands on his hips, watching the two with a mix of reverence and guilt. He knew there were still battles ahead, papers to sign, arrangements to be made, but in that moment, something had shifted. The town had chosen to remember, and Harlan could finally rest. The next morning, the barn smelled of rain-soaked hay and new beginnings. It had rained lightly overnight, a rare blessing in Bramblehorn, and the soft patter on the tin roof had lulled Wren into the first real sleep she'd had in weeks. When she opened her eyes, her body was curled beside Harlan's, her hand still resting on his shoulder. For a terrifying second, she couldn't feel him breathe. But then, a shallow rise, then another. He was still there. Dr. Winona Winnie, Cray, arrived early, a thermos of coffee in one hand and a worn vet bag in the other. "He made it through the night," she said softly to Cyrus, who leaned on the barn post. "I won't lie, he's still fragile. But the will to survive? That's stronger in him now than it's ever been. And that's her doing." Outside, the mood in town had shifted. Some still whispered in corners, folks like Roy Breeden, who didn't like that the law bent for one little girl and her horse. But others had started showing up with quiet gestures, a box of groceries left on the church steps, a bag of oats by the barn door, a donated coat hanging on a fence post. Wren watched all of it from a distance, unsure how to feel about people remembering she existed. At the diner, Reverend Tilley spoke to a small crowd over black coffee and biscuit crumbs. "What that girl reminded us," he said, voice low and steady, "is that love don't follow paperwork. It shows up when it's needed, not when it's scheduled. And that horse." He remembered her when the world didn't. Heads nodded, eyes lowered. No one argued. Back at the barn, Cyrus helped Wren carry water to Harlan. His steps were shaky, but for the first time, the gelding tried to stand. Legs trembling, he rose halfway, then paused, sweat breaking along his shoulders. Wren gasped and ran to his side, steadying him the only way she knew, with her voice. "You can do it, boy. You already saved me once. I'm not going anywhere now." And as if those words reached into some place deeper than muscle or bone, Harlan pushed up, shaky but upright. The barn filled with silence, then quiet awe. Winnie covered her mouth. Cyrus lowered his hat in respect. Wren smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't come from joy, but from survival. And in that fragile moment, the girl and the horse stood together. Not broken anymore, just healing. A week passed, and with each sunrise, Harlan stood a little taller. His ribs were still visible, but strength was returning to his legs. The wound in his hip still made him limp, but there was purpose in every step now. Wren brushed him every morning, whispering stories from the days before the fire, of Maggie Hillgrave humming in the kitchen, of Thomas reading scripture on the porch, of nights spent under the stars with only Harlan for company. The past, once buried in smoke and silence, now spilled gently back into the world. Cyrus stopped by the barn more often than he admitted. Sometimes he brought grain, other times just stood with his arms crossed, listening to Wren talk to the horse. He wasn't good with kids, never had been, but something in the girl's calm, stubborn spirit reminded him of someone he'd once lost. And though he never said it out loud, he found himself checking the barn doors last thing every night, making sure she was still there, still safe. Mayor Thatch Blevins kept his distance. Publicly, he praised the town's moral unity in allowing Wren to stay. Privately, he struggled with the storm he'd helped stir, the doubt, the risk, the bending of rules. But when he passed her in the street one morning and saw her walking hand in hand with Reverend Tilley, he tipped his hat and kept walking. Some things, he figured, were bigger than politics. At Sunday service, the pews were fuller than usual. Wren sat in the front row with Reverend Tilley and Miss Abigail. She wore a clean dress donated by the pastor's wife, and a pair of polished black boots that still looked too big for her feet. When the choir began singing "Blessed Assurance," she held her hymnal close but didn't sing. She didn't need to. Her presence was its own testimony. Outside, after the service, Roy Breeden approached. The old rancher took off his hat, cleared his throat, and extended a small cloth bag to Wren. "Oats," he said, without looking her in the eye. "For the horse." Wren accepted the bag without a word, but Cyrus saw her smile just barely twitch at the corner of her lips. Even the hardest hearts, it seemed, could be softened, if not by reason, then by a child's unwavering faith. That night, as the sun dipped below the ridge and cast a golden glow over Bramblehorn, Wren leaned against the stable wall, arms folded behind her head. Harlan grazed nearby, still limping, still tired, but alive. She looked up at the stars and whispered, "I think we're finally home." And in the quiet that followed, the night seemed to agree. Spring came late that year, but when it did, it settled softly over Bramblehorn, in the fields, in the trees, and in the eyes of those who had watched Wren and Harlan rise from the ashes. The barn had been cleaned, repainted by volunteers. A wooden nameplate was nailed to the stall, "Harlan, Survivor." Folks from neighboring counties had heard the story, and they came by on Sundays just to glimpse the chestnut gelding who waited to die and chose to live. Wren had grown, not in size, but in spirit. She moved through the town like someone born there, though everyone knew better. At the diner, she helped Miss Abigail fill sugar jars and wipe tables. At the church, she lit candles before service. And in the afternoons, she sat with Harlan beneath the cottonwood trees, reading aloud from a Bible Maggie Hillgrave had once given her, the edges singed, but the words still whole. Cyrus Vane filed every document he could find to secure legal guardianship. It wasn't official yet, but no one questioned where Wren belonged anymore. She had taken to riding Harlan slowly down the edge of the pasture, careful of his limp, patient with his pace. Every step he took was a quiet defiance of the pain he'd endured. And every time she dismounted, she whispered, "We did it," as if reminding him or herself that survival had become something greater than escape. Mayor Blevins, once distant, had a bench built outside the courthouse, engraved with the words, "What the fire missed, the heart remembered." No one asked who chose the phrase, but most guessed right. Reverend Tilley, gray but steady, led a small dedication ceremony under a pale blue sky, with Wren sitting beside Harlan, one hand in his mane, the other pressed over her heart. As the sun set one evening, painting the fields in hues of gold and crimson, Cyrus stood at the fence line, arms folded, watching the two of them. Wren had taken off her boots and stood barefoot in the grass, her dress fluttering in the breeze. Harlan nudged her gently with his nose, and she laughed, a soft, clear sound that cut through the quiet like a hymn. For the first time in a long while, the town of Bramblehorn felt whole. Not perfect, not healed completely, but whole in the way that matters most. The kind of whole that's earned through truth, pain, and second chances. And as the stars blinked into the night sky, Wren leaned against her horse and whispered, "We're not just safe anymore. We belong."